Aloha and welcome to our video on the endocrine and excretory systems. We'll explain what hormones do, we'll talk how the excretory system regulates water and removes waste, and finally we'll explain how a feedback loop works. So the endocrine system is a series of glands in our body. We'll talk about real quickly where they are. We have the hypothalamus up here in the brain. We have the pineal gland and the pituitary gland also in the brain. We have the thyroid gland, which we'll find around our neck, and our thymus gland, which is above the heart. We have the adrenal glands, which are located above the kidneys, and the pancreas actually is a large glandular organ as well. And then we have the gonads. In females, we have the ovaries, and then in males, we have the testes. So let's take a look at some of these glands and see what they do. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of these glands. We talked about where they were, now let's talk about what they do. We'll start with the adrenal glands. Those are on the kidneys and they produce adrenaline, and that'll give us an increase in metabolic activity and give us more glucose in the blood. So this is what gives us that burst of energy we need when we have that adrenaline flow. Next are the gonads, and those are the testes in males and the ovaries in females. In males, it produces sperm and produces testosterone, and estrogen is produced in females. We have the hypothalamus, which is going to regulate the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is what maintains water and salt balance in our bodies. So that makes sure that we don't get dehydrated and make sure that we have enough salts and stuff that we can function properly. We also have the pancreas, which regulates the level of glucose in the blood, and that's done through insulin. So when you hear about diabetes and people with pancreatic issues, what we're talking about is that level of glucose, making sure we have enough and not too much. The pineal gland up in the brain secretes melatonin, and that's going to help us regulate our sleep to make sure that we get the rest that we need. We have the thymus gland on the heart, and that helps certain white blood cells develop, and that works in the body defense system, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We also have the thyroid gland, and the thyroid is going to help regulate metabolism, and it regulates the calcium level in the blood. So you can see how these glands secrete out these hormones, and these hormones are going to give signals to the body as to what it needs to be doing. So that quickly takes us through the endocrine system. Remember, the endocrine system have all of these different glands that we talked about, and you can see where they're located in the body. And basically, they all produce hormones, and those hormones help regulate body functions. Next up is the excretory system. And the excretory system primarily is composed of the kidneys and then the bladder and the tubes that we use to connect them. The ureters, which connect the kidneys to the bladder, and then the urethra, which connects the bladder to the outside world. Okay, so let's take a look at the kidney real quickly. We'll notice that we have them here and they're located there. And what the kidneys do is they kind of work as a filter system for the blood. They take out a lot of the toxins in the blood for us. So as blood flows in, it'll get smaller and smaller into the capillaries, which will wrap around a nephron here. And you can see what happens is as the blood flows through, the concentration gradient will pull these toxic products out. And these toxic products will collect in the kidneys and then pass down to the bladder, where eventually they'll pass out of the body altogether. Now it's at this point we want to talk about a feedback loop. And a feedback loop, quite simply, is where we have a system that's monitoring what's going on, and that system will determine what the next steps are. So what we like to look at is a thermostat, and a thermostat's going to be there, and quite simply, if the room temperature decreases, it sends a message to the thermostat. The thermostat will then what? It'll turn on the heater and it will increase the temperature in the room. If it gets too warm, then it turns off that heater. So what this does is it kind of determines what's going on and what we want to process with. Now, the biggest feedback loop that we talk about in our body deals with dehydration, and that's why we mention it here. And what happens is if you're outside and it's hot, then you start to sweat, and sweating is going to lead to dehydration or a lack of water in the body. So as we lose water, our blood volume is going to decrease. And as our blood volume decreases, that means there's less of it going there. More of it's going to have to get to the skin to try and cool off. So now we're starving other parts of our body for blood. Because of this, it's not going to the lungs as much. We're trying to cool it off. We start to see this buildup of carbon dioxide. And when we build up carbon dioxide, the body's response is to breathe a little bit more rapidly. So we're trying to get that carbon dioxide out of the blood, and we're noticing that it's going on. Our kidneys start to react a little bit differently, and what they're going to do is they're going to try and put more water back into the system, so the blood there, so our blood volume will increase, And if none of these fail-safe checks work to cool us off and it all continues, ultimately we can have heat stroke and death is the end result. So the feedback loops kind of work as a system of the body saying, okay, we have all these different ways to regulate it. So once I start sweating, it's going to go here and feed into another loop, into another loop, into another loop. And ultimately, if it doesn't work out, that's what will cause us to die. But hopefully one of these loops will reverse the process. We can get the water and the fluids back into us and dehydration doesn't occur. Okay, so as we were talking about the excretory system, we have three different parts. We have the kidneys here, we have the bladder, we have the ureters and the urethra that are going to work through it. And the functions of the excretory system are to remove wastes, primarily from the body, but also to regulate the water balance. Okay, so that's it for this video. As always, good luck in the lessons, and we'll see you in the next video.